Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap, and I'm just so very excited about this conversation we're going to be having. But before we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. We're also going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards at the end of today's webinar, so please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, today's webinar is going to be a good one. It's a panel discussion. It's on the topic of measure customer value with self-service observability. Our speakers today are Helen Beal, who is the Chief Ambassador at DevOps Institute, and Adam Frank, who's VP of Product and Design at MoogSoft, and myself, of course, the moderator for today's event. So before we get things kicked off, though, I would like to invite Helen and Adam to both tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kick off today's discussion. Helen, why don't you start?
Hey, Charlene, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. So thank you very much for having me and Adam along. I'm Helen Beal, as you said. I'm Chief Ambassador at DevOps Institute. I'm also a DevOps and Ways of Working coach and consultant, speaker, writer, trainer, and gaming facilitator. So do quite a lot of stuff that helps people adopt DevOps practices and principles as they seek to become a high-performing organization.
And I guess that leaves me, and thank you, Charlene, for having me as well, and Helen. So I do run product management and design at MoogSoft, as it says in the title, and I've been in and around engineering and DevOps solutions for most of my career at this point. So I am thrilled to be here and talk about it today.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you both for taking the time and getting on today's webinar. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of great information delivered during today's presentation that will be some surefire takeaways for our audience members. And so let's go ahead and dive right on into the discussion. You know, when we talk about DevOps, you know, value is always a huge part of the conversation, and it's growing more and more valuable as the day goes on, the days roll on, especially in light of the pandemic that we're currently facing, and the fact that organizations really have to, a lot of them have had to pivot to just remain relevant and you know, be successful in these strange days that we're living in. So digital transformation is taking a front seat for a lot of organizations, and adoption of DevOps practices and processes is a large part of that. So any way that we can make the process easier for organizations, I'm sure is going to be very well received. So measuring customer value obviously is going to be a large part of that conversation. So I want to kick things off with a question for you, Helen, which is right there on your screen. How do teams define value? And it's you know, and especially as we're talking in the context of you know, customer value.
You know, I think unfortunately the short answer is they don't. I think they really want to. And as you've just said, we've always had a lot of conversations about value outcomes. And in traditional ways of working, people would stand up a project and they'd say a project was worth X amount of £1 million, and they'd, or dollars or euros or whatever currency you're in. And they'd expect it to deliver that at the end of it, and then it would overrun and go over budget, and then no one would ever measure what it delivered. Now we're in this new DevOps world where we're trying to do things a bit more incrementally. I think the definition of value is becoming increasingly important, and what I've been seeing is organizations really trying to get to grips with this, and teams arranging themselves around value streams, so becoming product teams or feature teams or platform teams, and understanding that they do own the end-to-end life cycle, And teams are getting better at looking at value flow. So they're good at looking at things like velocity and deployment frequency and stuff like that to understand how fast they are creating and delivering value. What they're still not particularly good at, in my observation, is understanding what value is. So somebody said quite recently, I heard someone say value is in the eye of the beholder, which I thought was a very insightful comment. Of course, there's lots of people have looked at things like, do we measure value from the business perspective, from the customer perspective? Who is it that cares about the value? So I think the kind of starting capability for teams is they start thinking about their revenue, normally as a product, and then maybe start thinking about profit, and then they'll start thinking about things like basket size, so how much people are buying at any one time, or how much conversion they're getting. They look at things like Net Promoter Score, and then they might think that that's a little bit of a traditional way of looking at things. They might look at things like referrals, they look at spend over time, they look at reviews on app stores and trust radius and things like that. So they've got a lot of those, but they're more kind of the business value. So I think what gets more interesting is if we think about how to get that customer value analysed and understood. And I think this is where we start looking at the data that we're getting from the application. So we start talking about different things like session length and bounce rate, and what happens during various steps of the customer journey, and it becomes more about the usage of the pieces of the applications or services and what we're seeing from an application performance perspective, rather than the kind of nuts and bolts of the currency that impacts that things might be having on the product or service. Adam, does that reflect on what you're seeing in terms of how the teams you work with are defining what value means to them?
Yeah, definitely. And I think just even in the software industry as a whole, a lot of companies are becoming a lot more product-led. So meaning that they want to guide their users to some type of valuable outcome. So of course, in order to do that, they need to define what that valuable outcome is. And there could be, minor milestones or things along the way to help edge them along to that meaningful outcome. But yeah, I think you're spot on. I think the days of assessing what the project is going to deliver in the end, calculating everything, and then did it deliver that value in the end, is those are kind of out the door. We need to continue to increment that value and make sure that we have a mixture of both the business that you're in, but of course the customer value that you are trying to drive that outcome to. And whether that's using little use I'm drawing a blank on what it is right now, but they actually use a little bit of confetti for some of their milestones. It kind of makes you feel good inside, like, great, I did something. Well, that's you achieving some little piece of value to get you to that outcome that you ultimately want to get to.
Get a little dopamine hit going on in there, makes you keep coming back more, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Zappos, the website. If you're, every time you buy a pair of shoes, like, this cat like jumps up and goes into your shopping cart, and it's like, yay, So I mean, that's everybody excited about shopping. I guess it's the same thing. Yeah. So, well, that's and it's interesting because value means something different to everybody, right? And to Adam, to your point, the fact that you have to define what that means is an extremely critical part of the process. But along with that, then Helen, how do teams measure the value that they are providing? Are there different baselines, different methodologies? What are we talking about here?
I think it's as much about how as where and when, actually. So I think one of the things that teams are missing as well is thinking of this as an incremental process. So if we think about Agile being very experimentational, what we should be doing is actually writing a value estimate into our product backlog, into our user stories or our PBIs. So saying, if we spend the time coding this feature, when it goes live, we think it will have this impact, and that impact means X amount of value. And as I said earlier on, it could be that X amount of users are going to buy X amount of more product, and that's a very simple way of looking at it. But it could be that actually we're going to increase the stickiness of the site by a certain amount, and that's how the value is measured. Or it could be that we're going to help people stay in the shopping basket for longer, or help them buy more product if we're a retailer. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. But most teams at the moment, from my experience, find it quite hard to get those numbers. They have to work quite hard to get the data out of their systems in order to be able to analyze it and understand what's just happened. And it's also not baked into the process. So what I said about it not just being about the how, but also about the when and where, in that ideal state of high capability where they're writing it into Jira or Azure DevOps or whatever it is where their backlog is, the question then becomes what happens at the end of the cycle. Is it automated that they have a look at it? Is it baked into their standard agile sprint review or retrospective process that they have a look? And then what happens? So how do they use that data that they are collecting on the success or failure? And remember, failure is also a learning, so we have a choice to pivot or persevere. At this point, how does that influence how they go back into the backlog? So we've got that circle that they're going around. So I think most teams are doing it quite manually at the moment, and I think there is an opportunity for teams really to exploit existing monitoring tools, and I'll pass over to Adam to explain how we can layer AI onto existing monitoring and alerting tools as well to help teams make those measurements and make that connection through the whole value chain.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you know, again, you're spot on. Looking at from you know, working with many startups and into larger enterprises, you know, anywhere from converting those customers to unblocking a customer from the tiniest thing, and really looking at both the customer data, the user data, and I think A/B testing in this scenario is fantastic. You know, if the button's on the left versus the button on the right, you know, am I getting some, you know, more traction with one way or the other? So really adding that type of capability in and you know, using feature flags to release it here and there is going to be a great way as you learn along the way. And like you said, failures are also learning opportunities. So don't consider the lower rate with the button on the left side a complete failure. You know, you actually learn something from that. The whole glass is half full, I guess, right? So maybe it is better on the right side. But also mixing in that machine data as well. So as you start to you know, emit more and more metrics about your applications, more and more logs, and look at the traces and things like that, the response times, there's a lot of things that you can start to measure value upon, from the stability, the reliability, the uptime, things like that, within these applications that sometimes provide incalculable value. And it's really understanding you know, the rate of which your customers are on there and using it, or versus, you know, is 1 second, 2 seconds, whatever it may be, of a response time too short for them, and they're off going somewhere else. It's the kind of that observability data coming from the application and the system itself that you can really start to provide a lot of value points out of.
Interesting. Okay, so, well, then, you know, along with that, then, how can teams actually, how can teams actually sustain the value that they are providing? And, you know, it seems like it's all well and good to do the testing and everything, but, you know, how beyond that, how is that sustainable? How, you know, what are there best practices, or what do you have there?
I think this is where we get into, you know, what Helen alluded to there, and start using some of the AI. So the larger, you know, when you first start to build an application, it's probably for, you know, you and your friends, and then extends out to some family members, and then it grows beyond there. Next thing you know, you have hundreds and hopefully thousands, if not millions of users. And what comes with that is an insurmountable amount of data that a human just can't possibly sift through to find out both problems and also valuable points as well. So I think this is where we really start to get into talking about sustaining the value that you are providing, and using those learning opportunities, using AI to help pull out valuable items from the data, start to surface what is some type of actionable information, or some type of significant event that has happened within the environment that you can you know, do two things with. One, you know, certainly learn from, Or two, if it is something that has happened that you didn't necessarily want to happen, go ahead and get that resolved as fast as you possibly can. And then at the same time, go back to number one and learn from it to build in more reliability if that's what it takes. Or, like I said earlier, move the button from the left to the right if it's something of that sort of data that you are looking to. But having some real AI that can help you figure out, categorize this data and surface the relevant and important information is going to be very, very key in both the reliability of what you are doing and also sustaining the value that you are providing.
Excellent. Helen, do you have anything that you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I do. There's a phrase I once heard from my friend Nick at Sonotype, and he used to say that software is more like milk than wine. And that phrase was used in the context of security and vulnerabilities. And what we were saying there is that you build a piece of software and it's lovely and secure today, but give it a couple of hours or a couple of days and someone will have figured out a hack to it and figured out how to exploit some kind of hole in it. And I think you can actually apply the same phrase to kind of all software and look at it through a different lens, which is about its feature capability. So whilst you might build the all singing, all dancing application today that is better than anyone else's application, someone else will look at it, see some features that people really like and replicate it in their own application and maybe come up with some new funky new stuff that other people like as well. So you just can't stand still in this industry. And I think, sustainability is at the kind of foundations of what Agile is about. So what's really hard, as Adam said, though, is there's so much complexity in everything that we do, so much complexity in understanding how customers are responding and what's happening in our applications. It's really hard for a human to be able to receive all of that feedback and make sense of it. So what the AI is really doing, as Adam's explained, is taking all of that data and doing a lot of the processing for us and coming up with actionable insights that we can feed back into our whole value loop about what we're going to do next. So it's not just about, are we going to have an event that's going to cause an incident and some downtime? It's also about, are we seeing some events that are telling us something positive about something that we should adjust in the product that people really like Adam said about A/B testing? Or is there something that, we've just produced this feature that we thought everyone was going to adore, but a lot of people are coming to look at it but just not using it. So obviously we've designed it wrong, or they just don't like it or are not finding it useful. So yeah, that's my kind of key takeaway from that. Is software is like milk, is like milk, not like wine, from both a security and a feature perspective. Yeah.
I guess there's also one more thing there, and that's the the value that starts providing that you didn't even think about. So you design that feature that you're talking about, and you think it's going to be lovely and adopted out there, and it is, but in a completely different way than you imagined it.
Yes.
Like those are really valuable insights as well.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. So just a real quick time check here. We're about 20 minutes past the hour. We're 18 minutes past the hour. There's plenty of time for questions, and we are driving toward a question and answer period, but you do not have to wait until we get to the question and answer period. If you have a question for Helen or Adam at any time during today's presentation, please go ahead and just put it on in the go to webinar control panel and in the questions tab, and we'll get to as many as we can. So Adam, moving on from that, I mean, it's obviously it's great to have those actionable insights, but what exactly, what can we derive from the data as far as customer value and experience, those types of insights? What can the value, what can the data tell us?
I think there can be a lot of information that the data can tell us, and let's start with some logging aspects first. These are purpose-written messages, so hopefully you as a developer are writing these error messages so you can completely understand them and your team can completely understand them. But more importantly, the ones that are exposed to the users, they can completely understand them, and they're not left there with error 1, 2, 3 and scratching their head and wondering what to do. So there's a lot of information that you can decipher just from those error messages alone, writing those. But kind Kind of the other two sides of things, or I guess other three sides of things, the metric data, looking at the time series data, typically starts with a timestamp and a numerical value, and the name of whatever that might be. Now, there's not a lot of information in there, but when you start to track that over time, you start to analyze that and have that AI kind of establish what the normal boundaries are of that information. And then you start to layer that with some other time series metric data that you have. An event can happen. So whether that's on the kind of the low side or the high side of that thresholds, that can happen, and start to find some relations with that log data that you just had, whether it's a similar timestamp that these are having, or you're actually looking at the data itself and starting to derive information out of that very simple payload, like that metric name. Is there something that is consistent about that or key about that you can parse out and layer into something else, wherever that metric came from, whether it's part of your Kubernetes cluster or a standalone server somewhere, web front end, whatever it may be. Is there pieces of information that you can start to pull out of that data to help provide some context? And the same thing goes with the trace data as well, looking at the durations and anomalies and things like that, where that comes from in with the logs. And then when you start to have the three mixed together, again, really pulling the pieces of information out about each other to find that commonality, to find that similarity between them, so you can bring them all together and have a whole bunch more context about what is happening within the environment, so you can start to get the insights out of that, and what is happening to, again, change the button on the left or to change it on the right, or learn from that incident, or perhaps that feature is being used in a way that you didn't actually expect it to be. So the purpose-written error messages that you are writing might not be as clear as they should be, since everybody's going left when you designed it all to go right, but left is just working so perfectly.
Yeah, this makes me also think about, it's maybe worth talking to the audience a little bit about the difference between value flow and value realization. Because I think there is work that we can do with the data through the DevOps toolchain and get insights into how fast the value is being produced and delivered to the customer. And then this question is more, as Adam said, about kind of what's actually happening in terms of the value realization. So what's the actual customer experience looking like? How are they feeling when they use the product and service, and what are they getting from it? What value are they extracting from it themselves?
So what point in that in that process do you get that customer data and you can use that for those actionable insights?
I think it's all the time, and this is the beauty of the world that we live in now. In the past, it was in that whole old project world, it would be, the developers doing their thing, testers trying to test it. No doubt that phase had got squished. Then there was probably a horrible, live day that didn't move. So it was probably a horrible few weeks where everyone had to work 24 hours a day to try and hit the live date. There was probably some horrible merge incidents as large pieces of code tried to get matched together, and then lots of manual infrastructure builds and manual deployments, and lots of problems over a weekend, maybe in the week, as things settled down, and then they went into some kind of maintenance or warranty period, at which point the project team got split up and moved on to other projects. So no one ever went back and tried to get the data, probably because it would have been very difficult. They'd have had to get loads of logs and do lots of analysis, and it would have been very painful. But now, because we're in this higher velocity, more incremental, smaller pieces of work, there's more opportunity to kind of take a look every time you make a smaller change. And we now have the tools, we have all the monitoring tools, and then we have the AI that can analyze the monitoring tools. So a team theoretically could, at any point in the product lifecycle, say, let's have a look and see what's happening in our product. Can we see anything that happened since we made that release at 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon of that PBI that was in our backlog? Or they may choose to do it on more of a cadence, like I described earlier. So they could do it on a more sprint-based cadence. They could do it as part of a sprint review, and then maybe even use some of that to move into their sprint planning. Adam, is that the kind of methodology you're seeing in teams out there, or are you seeing something slightly different?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the evolution of IT ops and building it and shipping it out to production and that project kind of dismantling, but now there's people left over to try and support it and decipher and figure out what's going on. You know, that is just blended into you know, the world that we know of now of DevOps, and even the software engineer and the site reliability engineer. Those are being blended closer and closer together. So it's at all points in that value stream. You've got continuous integration, continuous delivery. You've also got continuous verification that is happening in things as well. And throughout that entire thing, understanding what's happening with the system and knowing what you can do to change it before it does actually go out is huge. You know, and then that work obviously carries over once it does go out to those customers, so they can continue to receive the reliability that you always intended them to.
That's great. That's great. And, you know, I obviously, you know, in addition to improving the customer experience, I imagine it, well, I know it helps organizations kind of pivot earlier if they need to. So, you know, Helen, you touched on this a little bit in your previous answer, but, you know, AI can be, you know, so helpful in uncovering the customer value and the insights derived. So, but, you know, how does it actually kind of, you know, take care of some of that mundane stuff that developers need to deal with?
Yeah, of course, toil is very much a site reliability engineering term. It's all the really boring kind of daily stuff that people do very manually. It's very onerous. They're doing it over and over again. So a key aspect of the SRE or site reliability engineer's role is to reduce toil wherever it's happening. So we can use data to understand where time is being wasted or time is being slowed, or the flow of value is being slowed down. So we can look for opportunities to make improvements and highlight where an SRE could be spending their time to code themselves out of toil, basically. So an SRE is kind of half developer, half IT operations person, but they use their developer skills to automate the IT operational tasks, to essentially reduce toil in order to release that time for more innovation. So that's the whole purpose, is to actually create more time to create more value for the customer. So I can pass to Adam for a bit more detail, but what we see when we're using observability, telemetry, and alerting and monitoring tools is what we are getting alerted to is patterns in our infrastructure where we are seeing recurring problems. And you can almost translate recurring problem to toil. So if we're doing the same thing over and over again, it's kind of that definition of madness and that definition of toil. So that's immediately we can see that is something that we should maybe consider not doing anymore and finding a way to not do it anymore, which in our world is by automating it. So Adam, do you want to build on that a little bit more by the kind of patterns that we might see when we're using AI in order to identify those repeatable patterns of pain that we can remove?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it even starts a lot earlier than that. I mean, I don't know how many times in my past where I've heard customers talk about, you know, going into a meeting, a post-mortem or a post-incident learning meeting after the fact that it happens, and one of the first questions is always, okay, well, what did the monitoring tell us? You know, did we have any insights around the telemetry? And a lot of times there is the answer of no, or yes, we did, but we've now learned that we need to go back and we need to start adjusting our thresholds or looking at our different monitoring. And you know, AI is there to help do that for us, so we can not have to worry about as humans setting certain thresholds. But the AI in itself can start to analyze the data and do statistical calculations and run algorithms against it to start to adjust with the dynamic and ephemeral environments that we do have. Start to look at multiple data points and streams together and determine, you know, what is normal here within this cluster versus this cluster, whatever it may be, and start to really surface that for us. Once we start to narrow that down, there can be a lot of alerts that are generated out of this, but you know, which ones are the significant ones? Which ones have any type of relation to one another? And again, that's an activity that a lot of people, they'll have a screen come to them, or they'll have a Slack channel start to fill up with 95 different alerts, and now they have to start to sift through them and figure out what's related to what. So allowing AI to, again, look at the similarity between that, whether it's part of a topological feature or any type of textual similarity or time-based pattern, that's there. That AI is there to do that for us. So then what we're left over with is something of a higher degree of context. So whatever happened plus why it happened, and that's really what we want to get to is the why that it happened. The what happened can that can continue to slack us and alert us all day long, but we really want to understand the why that happened, the cause of that, so we can start to restore that faster, learn from it, and get to the ultimate goal of no repeat incidents. So we can start to again understand that this has happened in the past. Maybe we should look into it a little bit further and not just apply that same band-aid, if you will, that we did last time, and really get down to fix it so this does not repeat.
And I think there's a couple of problems that I've seen in quite a few places with this, and one is conceptual and one is kind of practice. And the conceptual problem is the idea of a single root cause. And in our industry, and we use analogies so often with aviation and with healthcare because our industry is equivalently complex, and actually there's very rarely a single root cause. It's normally a combination of things that are happening that are causing the problems. I think you link that complexity to the practice problem, and the practice problem is that many teams are under so much pressure to put more change through whilst working in very fragile environments because they're carrying a lot of technical debt that's built up over a lot of years. What happens is an incident happens, they kind of try and figure out what's happened as quickly as they can, remediate as quickly as they can, but fail to actually execute the improvements afterwards. So they actually effectively build more technical debt. So they kind of, incident happens, they fix the incident, and then they go back to doing the change and delivering the change that they wanted. So I think it's kind of this snowball, and this doesn't really answer the question, but I'm going to put it to Adam to help us out with it in a minute, but there's this snowball effect that we have in that the problems are really complex and we don't really analyze them properly. We fix them as quickly as we can and we don't go back and do the long-term remediation. We kind of just patch it and move on. And how, I guess what the AI and the data can tell us is what you were saying, these repeatable things. It surfaces across teams when they're not resolving the things that happen over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's some of that insight and some of that data that's really going to allow us to learn from it to go ahead then and code to protect against it, so it doesn't continue to happen, repeat and repeat. I mean, there's an entire industry out there that is founded on there will always be incidents. And I, for one, firmly believe there will always be incidents in the software that we deliver and things that happen. But the ultimate goal can be to get to no repeat incidents. So if we can continue to learn from all of this and help incidents derive insights out of the data that we are emitting in our code ourselves, then we can get a lot closer to no repeat incidents. And I think as part of the tool chain as well, when we are looking at delivering the software, delivering the features, I think we are getting a lot closer to realizing what we can do throughout that chain and starting to use some of that data for things like automatic rollback, before it gets out to customers, or perhaps it did get out to customers and just on the brink of causing something that we didn't want it to, and perhaps AI is helping optimize whatever that may be to roll that particular that merge back or that code change back, whatever it may be, so we can go ahead and see what was about to happen, because it was unexpected. Nobody on the planet is purposely rolling out code that is going to be malicious to their users. So they want to learn from that, and let's hope not. Let's hope not. So they can learn from that, and again, code to protect against it and fix it so it doesn't happen in the future. And
of course, you're touching on one of my favorite topics to talk about with you, which is about self-healing. But anything we can do to automate a remediation practice is, of course, the removal of toil as well, because most remediation is quite onerous, isn't it? It's like patching, it's like reconfiguring something. It's quite dull. But where's the line, Adam, between what we can do right now and where you think self-healing can be? I know we talk about this a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, in order to become self-healing, or in order to run any type of automated remediation, just like you, that machine needs that context. And again, that's where the AI is there to help bring out that context of the relationships upstream or downstream within the services to start to pull it all together. I know I've seen a lot of the times in the past that these 10 things happen, so go run automation on these 10 things, when really 9 of them, it's not going to matter until you run it on, kind of the first one or the first 2, whatever it may be. And having some more of that context, that really enables us to get to a point where we can start to run automated remediation, or even get to automated optimization. So whether it has to scale in, scale out, or roll something back, those are all different forms of optimization, and the context is needed in order to do that. So I think once we get that context, which we start to have today based on the insights that AI derive from us, then we will start to get into practices of self automation and optimization and things like that.
Well, why don't we go ahead and kind of tie that conversation into self-service observability, and maybe you guys can talk about how how self-service observability can actually help teams improve their work, by empowering them with the data, with the insights, whatever they need. But Adam, why don't you go ahead and start the conversation here?
Sure. So I think much like we've been talking about, you've got somebody who is writing some code in order to be able to do something, a feature or functionality, whatever it may be, that's going to be pushed out to their user base. They really want to be able to leverage the insights that they're going to code for that particular feature or functionality. So they want to be able to emit some of these metrics, emit some of these logs, emit some of these traces, and have that flow into their observability platform, and have that information derive out of that platform using the AI to then circle back and notify them, and whether that's at any stage throughout, or whether it is within production. So the capability really needs to be there for them to use what they need when they need, and kind of have it nice and easy for them to adopt. So they're not repeatedly doing something every single time they write a line of code for this. They need to go in and like we talked about, set another threshold, or write another rule to say that this belongs with this and this is relationship to this. That just, again, creates the toil that this entire process and practice is supposed to reduce. So having that available to them in a self-serve manner means that they can start to leverage it and consume it at their own pace, and start to have things flow as they are needed, with the ability, of course, to go back and adjust whenever they want. But the practice of all of the consulting to set things up for you, and reading multiple docs to figure all this stuff out, it's becoming so much easier and so much more consumable for them to use.
I think in traditional IT environments, what we've seen is that kind of monitoring and observing capability sitting in the IT operations teams. And what we have in DevOps is a practice where we say that we build it, we own it, and we have the one team that owns the value stream end to end. So where people may have been used to in the past someone else having the responsibility for owning that monitoring tools, maybe even collecting the data, preparing the data, and presenting the data to another team, in order to be able to move quickly and have the data quickly, the self-service is essential. We can't be waiting for another team to produce a report. The teams have to have access to it themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They have just gone through the trouble of adding whatever it is to their code to be able to produce this data that they want to see. They don't want to sit around and wait for you to report on it and give it to them. They want to be able to continue to come in and create their own dashboard and subscribe to the data that they support, and get that notification, and all that good stuff that comes with it, so they can continue to learn from it and own the actual feature functionality that they are delivering.
Yeah.
Good stuff, guys. We have, it's about 20 minutes doing a time check, 20 minutes to the top of the hour. We have plenty of time for question and answer period. If you guys have any, kind of final thoughts on the topic before we go ahead and dive into the question and answer period, just want to, kind of let you guys have the floor a little bit. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and dive right on into question and answer.
I just want to make a couple of points really about kind of the DevOps way of working again, really, which is about autonomy and self-discovery. So getting back to that kind of last question, there is an organizational change or a change in the way that leadership works in this model. So in the past, teams may have been very used to being kind of told what to do, someone else kind of managing them and telling the team what they're doing, whereas the new model really is about distributing authority so that we have these autonomous teams that are empowered to self-discover. So it is a new way of working that will feel quite alien to some teams, but there's always going to be people with the passion for autonomy. Those are the people that want that self-service and have the appetite to do it. But I don't think we can underestimate culturally what an impact this new way of working is on teams and how different it can be to have the power. Particularly in some enterprises, the idea of self-service is complete anathema because there's always been a central procurement team. So the idea of being able to go onto the internet and download a piece of software or log into an online portal and access a service is something that's not really been there before. But if leadership really want to give their team the ability to build it, own it, and have autonomy, then the self-service element is essential. And the only way that people can improve is by understanding what they're doing. And the only way to do that is to have metrics on their current state, and that requires observability. And if you want to accelerate observability, you have to augment it with AI. That would be my final kind of statement on that question. Adam, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's right along the same lines that you were saying, and I think the whole premise of we build it, we own it, having that autonomy, there needs to be the trust there in order to do that. So I think whatever the intent is around what they are providing, then that trust needs to be there. In order for that trust to be there, they need the developer. In this case, when I say they need to be able to prove that they're not only coding and delivering feature functionality, but they are improving it and the reliability is there. So they're going to need all of this information in order to do that and continue to learn. So I think you're spot on there, and that's what we like to do. That's what we want to continue to empower people and have them deliver their intents.
Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and dive into the question and answer period, because I'm really excited about a lot of the questions that we've received so far. So I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to go through them. If you have a question for Helen or for Adam, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. Now's the time. We'll go ahead and dive into them. Here is the first question for you. How do DevOps practitioners, how can they achieve constant change and zero downtime with observability?
I love this question because it is, of course, the balance of DevOps, of throughput and stability that we're looking for here. So really optimizing both throughput and stability at the same time. One of the things I'm going to throw at Adam in a moment, once I've made a few comments myself, though, is conceptually the possibility of having zero downtime. Adam's already made the statement that we'll always have incidents, and I completely and utterly agree with him. As long as we're making change, there'll always be incidents. But of course, an incident doesn't always equal downtime. But observability probably isn't the answer for zero downtime. I would suggest that architectural models around things like microservices, feature flags, toggles, A/B testing, canary testing, blue-green deployments, all of those kind of limited blast radius techniques and architectural models are actually the keys to getting zero downtime. But Adam may have a different view, but I'm going to kick it off by saying, Adam, is zero downtime a possibility in your view?
I don't think zero downtime is a possibility at this point. There are so many different factors, unless you are the engineer that is building coding from the hardware that it is running on straight through to the software. And then even then, you've got so many different things in the way. Like it's the internet right now is between you and I have no idea what else between. But let's say I develop this entire platform, the hardware it's running on everything. I don't control the internet, so there's always going to be factors in there that are in the way of whatever we do. So I think the best and the ultimate goal is really no repeat incidents. And of course, mitigating any incidents that might happen in the future, of course, and coding for the reliability and practicing learning, continuous learning around the observability data that you are receiving, and marrying that up with some of the user data that you are also looking at to help build in that reliability and the value that both you and your business and ultimately your customers need and want from you.
I do want to follow up that with this slight kind of follow-up question for Adam on that, though. It's about preempting failure, which we've not explicitly talked about today, but of course, traditional environments often used to rely on a customer to tell them that there was a problem or a system was down. And then we got monitoring alerting, which would hopefully tell us first that there was a problem before and give us a chance to fix it before a customer told us. But the more sophisticated we've got with APM and with AI, the more we can preempt failure, which is, I agree with you, I think zero downtime, we're a way off it, even with all the architectural models and the limited blast radius and stuff. But how much time typically can AI ops and observability save us in terms of preemption? How much warning can we get before something actually falls over and is broken?
I guess that varies depending on the software, the amount that your customers are leveraging it, and kind of what the experience is delivering there. But I'll tell a little story about a customer that we did have at one point that they were emitting, all of their application logs, and of course, emitting something. These application logs were the purpose-written messages that meant a lot to them, so they could start to understand what happened and how to go and how to fix that. But it wasn't actually until they started collecting and analyzing their metric data and marrying that up with some of the logging data that they really started to see advanced warnings. So the trend in that metric data either started to scale up a little bit too quickly or scale down a little bit too quickly and exceed whatever machine learning adaptive threshold was in and around that. And so that from them, there was about a 2.5 to 3 minute lead time that they had from collecting that metric data to just sitting there waiting for that logs. And it was with that type of data that they could actually code in the practice of a little bit more scaling and optimization. So then that built in even more time at that point. So they could get to it, recover it, whatever it might have been, and the user is none the wiser at that point. So I think the minutes that you can actually have, the seconds that you can have in today's environments to learn from and code and practice off of that, that could save so much time and keep your users there.
Yeah, and all that time saved goes to innovation of new value.
Absolutely.
Second count. Yeah. All right, great. Let's move on to the next question here. Does observability also help in predictive analysis? And is it used predominantly in IT operations and monitoring?
Yeah, I'll take that one first, Helen. I think absolutely. There's whether you want to call it predictive analysis or forecasting. There is a certain degree that we can all, as humans, and of course AI comes from the hopes and dreams of humans, we can look out to and start to forecast, whether it be the patterns in the weather, or of course, in our case, the patterns within that observability data. So what is that metric doing every Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? Are we seeing significantly more shoppers? That shopping cart is exceeding. Black Friday is a great example. Everybody's shopping carts on Black Friday are a heck of a lot fuller than they are on some random afternoon on a March and Tuesday. So it's patterns like that that we can start to discover from the data, start to forecast and predict based on what is happening previously within the environments to help us get a little bit more of that insight that we want to derive out of our data and take action off of that data.
Yeah, and I'll just repeat the DevOps tenet of we build it, we own it, in reference to is observability used predominantly in IT operations monitoring, because if we build it, we own it, then our DevOps team, there is no IT ops, we're all in one team, the Dev and Ops are all together. So in that case, observability becomes important to everyone in the team. I also think that there is a bit of a misnomer about observability just being used in production. I think we've talked about this quite a lot today, about using observability and telemetry in pre-production and the whole way through the early parts of the SDLC and even in the DevOps toolchain to look for potential problems and make improvements as well.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so quick time check. We are 10 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, maybe 3, we'll see. Here's one for you. How does self-service observability fit into an SRE mindset?
Do you want to start or shall
I? Go ahead, Ellen. Start on this one.
So let's think about what the SRE mindset is first of all. So key things an SRE, site reliability engineer, needs to think about. We talked about toil quite a bit already today. What the main other thing I always talk about in the context of SRE that we haven't talked about is SLOs and error budgets, so service level objectives and error budgets. So an SRE's job is to set an error budget, or agree would be a better word, agree an error budget, which kind of says this is where our SLO is, this is where we want it to sit, this is the parameters we're allowed to go outside of it, and if we exceed it, then we have, it's essentially a punishment, but it shouldn't be seen as a punishment, it's basically remediation. There's a change in the process and there has to be some extra steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. So the SRE's mind is on their error budget and their SLO and wanting to remain within the guardrails that have been set. What they don't want to do is be massively under it. The actual thing they need to do is basically spend their error budgets pretty much on the nose, because that shows that they're balancing that throughput and stability. So one of the things that we can do with observability is provide the SRE through self-service the ability to be constantly monitoring real time how they are doing against their error budgets. And an error budget is consistently or constantly reset, normally in a kind of sprint cadence as well. So they can check it on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis, and then they've got all that data as well that they can take to the next session where they decide what their next phase of error budget will look like. They've got all that data to advise them. So that's the SLO and error budget bit, and we did talk about toil in quite some detail earlier on, so that's the other big part of how observability helps an SRE. Adam, do you have much to add to that one?
I think that was a fantastic answer, so I will leave it at that. That was great.
All right. Let's see if we can squeeze 1 or 2 more questions in here. How does MoveSoft AI Ops apply to cloud native platforms based on microservices architectures?
Great question. I think I'll take this one, Helen. So I think it's around everything that we have been talking about today. So being able to discover the metrics that are running on your infrastructure and giving you the ability to emit the application metrics and things like that that you want to as well. Being able to collect that and analyze it at multiple points, so it draws out what that meaningful data is. It adapts with your data. It adapts with your ephemeral environment and pulls out anomalies. So it determines what those anomalies are and then starts to collect all of those together. So we take it from telemetry up into the actual events that are occurring within the telemetry and drawing out significant events within there. And then starting to look at the different patterns within those events to start to pull together some of the context. And with context then comes the probable root cause of that. Whether it's the 1 thing, 2 thing, 3 things, whatever it may be. but then that is presented to the user. So you've gone from the telemetry within your environment, straight through to that actionable information that you need to make informed decisions. And that's really where Moogsoft excels, is taking the telemetry data, whether it's natively, with the application itself, or whether it's, looking at some of the tools that you've already invested in and you love, and integrating to pull out some of that data to really give you that actionable information so you can make those informed decisions.
All right, great. Well, I think we have time for one more question here, and this is another one for you, Adam, I imagine. How do you recommend I get started with observability?
Yeah, great question. I think I actually had a fun time a couple of months ago, maybe a few months ago at this point, writing a little for dummies book called Observability with AIOps. Oh, look at that, there it is. This is a great way to get started. So there's a lot of different things within here, and honestly, it's the first answer isn't just start coding and looking at your data. You really want to be able to kind of set some goals and assess what it is that you want to achieve within your environment, within your teams and things like that, before you even start to set out and start to code some of this. So I think the easiest thing to do to get started is to definitely go to that link and download that book and have a read, but more importantly, determine what the value is that you want to start providing to your customers and your business, and set the goals around that and get that value out of there.
All right, and just in case you didn't see, in the GoToWebinar control panel, we have chatted out a link to access that book, to download it. And I believe that we're also going to include that link in our follow-up email post-webinar. So plenty of opportunities for the audience to download that book. So we are about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. So unfortunately, that's all the time we had for questions. But if we didn't get to your question, I apologize. We had a ton of them, and I will tell you, we did not get to a lot of them, unfortunately. But fear not, the folks at Moogsoft are getting a copy of all the questions that came in, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get your question answered. And also, Adam, do you want to say a few words about the observability tool, give it a try?
Yeah, sure. I think you can head on over to moogsoft.com/DODC, as you see on the screen right there, and I think that link might be posted in there as well. And have a free trial. Spin it up for yourself and start to see what the self-service platform can offer you when it comes to observability and really drawing out that actionable information that you need. So that is there today.
All right, great. Well, I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. I apologize, I didn't say that before, but thank you so much. There were so many great questions. And I also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand, as well as the two links that we just mentioned here. The webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can always go look for it there as well. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay, at the top of the hour, I did mention that we would be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, we'll get that done right now. Our first winner today is Arthur M. Congratulations, Arthur. Second winner today is Dan W. Congratulations, Dan. Third winner today is Heather M. Congratulations, Heather. And our final winner today is Jeffrey K. Congratulations, Jeffrey K. And to all of our winners today, we'll be following up with you offline to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So check your inbox. If you don't see an email from us, please check your spam folder. Helen, Adam, great presentation, great discussion. I just had such fun doing this, and I want to thank you both for your expertise and your time today. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charlene. It was a pleasure being here.
All right, great. Well, I also want to thank.
Yes. Thanks, Charlene.
Thank you. I also want to thank the audience today for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.